Howdy, welcome to Horticulture Innovators, a podcast series where we will explore impactful innovations in horticulture. I'm Amit Dhingra, your host. I'm a professor and head of the Department of Horticultural Sciences at Texas A&M University. In each episode, we'll explore the inspiring stories of the pioneers who are contributing to sustainability, wellness, and food security through their amazing work in horticulture. Well, today we are excited to have Dr. Haven Baker. He's with us. He's a true horticulture innovator. He's been at the forefront of developing several technologies, and today we're going to have a conversation to learn more about his journey and where he's headed next. Welcome, Haven.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So, there are very few people in ag tech who have really taken the lead and stayed with developing new technologies and bringing new things in the overall space of horticulture. We hear all about ag tech, where horticulture kind of gets left behind, but you've been working with a lot of horticulture crops. How did that happen? How did you get to work with horticulture crops in particular?
Well, and I get asked this occasionally by people looking how to get into the industry. I got lucky in the sense that I was born into it. I grew up on a specialty crop farm in an area where they grow lots of specialty crops, and we had grass seed and onions and potatoes, and I grew peas to pay for college myself. And so that sort of background I didn't earn. And then I didn't actually get an education in this space. I went more traditional science. The early part of my career, I was trying to get as far away from it as possible. And then in my 30s, I realized maybe horticulture and maybe farming wasn't so bad. So I went back and I joined the Simplot company, and it was helpful early in my career to see a big enterprise in lots of areas, and a company that specializes in a specialty crop like potatoes. So I started an effort in strawberries, and then when I founded Pairwise, I continued into berries and some of the other areas. But it's a combination of probably interest as well as background as well as luck.
Yeah, so horticulture crops. Of course, I'm biased. We've talked about this in the past as well. They've kind of been left behind a little bit in our conversations because when we talk ag, somewhere in the corners horticulture, and I've talked in the past about the term horticulture. It's kind of lost its usage in the American parlance, and the question is, what do we call this field? I know we've given the term specialty crops to this, but is that really all-encompassing? Does it tell the people what it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, I think of horticulture, the term, like I do botany, which is, it's something my dad or my granddad might have studied, in the sense that, and it's not really a business term. It doesn't describe it describes maybe the science, but not the industry, because the industry doesn't look at itself that way. So, I'm on the USDA Fruit and Vegetable Committee. Well, they decided to call it fruit and vegetable. I think specialty crops but then specialty crops quickly breaks down into nuts, berries, especially anyway. So I don't think we've got real good terminology for the whole area, but specialty is not bad. I guess I would challenge the notion that there's less interest. From my perspective on the genetics side, there's a lot of interest. Yeah. And I think there's going to continue to be more, and there's a recognition, and we could get into this. I think there's consumer recognition that there's advancement in this space. So, from where you sit, being a professor in horticulture, I can see that. But from a student perspective or an industry looking forward, I think this is an exciting area.
Well, just a factoid, I got my undergrad and master's in botany, so it was
we're
not that old, but that was in a different country also. So I think that term, it's almost like, these terms are evolving. We are always experimenting with these terms. One of the consequences, it seems, as I've learned from my colleagues who are much more senior and experienced in horticulture, is as we have stopped using this term, the number of departments of horticulture in the country has gone down from over 100 only 15, 20 years ago to, there are about 22 tier 1 institutions that now offer a 4-year degree in horticultural sciences. What I'm observing is a lot of parents are not aware that there are a lot of good jobs in this field as well because we don't use that term. So that's kind of the context.
Yeah, I don't have a solution for you. That makes sense. In general, I think there's a lot of interest about the food system. I think there's a recognition that we need to eat more fruits and vegetables, and a need for and nuts, and a need for more sustainable solutions. So I think the demand and the need is there, and the awareness is there on the output, but maybe on the science side, it's not quite right. So anyway, you've got colleagues in marketing here, right? But I think it really is a marketing question. But I don't feel like pushing on the word horticulture is going to get you there, but I don't have a better one for you. So sorry, no solution here.
No worries. We are discussing this. So you've been in the industry for a very long time, but it'll be great for our students or our audience to really learn. There's no linear career path. And how did you become a horticulture innovator? What was your degree path, and how did you get here? It'll be great to just kind of recount that. Yeah,
sure. I mean, I'll tell you what, just to lay it out, it sounds really nice now. When I was going through it, it felt circuitous and sometimes frustrating. And so sometimes these stories make a lot more sense at the end than they do at the beginning. So like I said, I grew up on a farm, and I was trying to get as far away from the farm as possible. But I've always had an interest in technology, and even some of my summer jobs in high school and early college were collecting petioles and doing some of the analysis, soil sampling. And so I'd been connected to the technical side really early, but I studied biomedical engineering. And right after that, I got some advice, which was that, look, if you're going to go to grad school, it's best to go work a couple of years, because you come back so much better prepared. The disadvantage is if you get addicted to having a job and that lifestyle, then you don't go back. And so it really requires some self-reflection of, can you go get a job, earn a decent salary, buy a nice car, start to have a little bit of life, and then give it all up again to be a student. And if you can, that's the better path. But if you can't, just continue on to grad school. So I went out to Silicon Valley, and I started at HP Labs, and I worked at a biotech startup. And then I had a mentor who on the human biotechnology side that had been a professor. He'd one of the early guys at Genentech, and then he went back and became a professor. He said, "Hey, come work for me and help me manage my lab, and you can do your studies at the same time." And so I went out to Northeastern University. I got a PhD. And with him, I started a company. And it's like kind of started to get that entrepreneurial bug maybe a little bit. And it didn't go anywhere, but it was the right experience to say, that's kind of what I want to do. I want to be on the business side. And so I finished my PhD, and I applied to Harvard Business School. And, the story, I think one of the lessons there is stories about failure are just as valuable as stories about success early in career. You learn so much. And so so I did an MBA at Harvard, and then I had a year at a hedge fund. So I got finance experience, and now I'm in my mid-30s, and early to mid-30s, and all of a sudden living in the West, being close to farms, and I kind of like the outdoors, and I had kids now. That sounds kind of appealing. And so through a connection, I got connected to Simplot, and I got introduced to their chairman, Scott Simplot, great guy, and they brought me on board. And I worked in innovation for him for a year at the corporate level, and they put me in charge of their plant sciences. And it was really, having some of that business experience, having some of the technical, and then having an agricultural background. And so if I'd have gone through a traditional plant physiology or breeding background, I might have gotten that job. It had been 10 years later. Mm-hmm. This path got me there. And so I spent 8 years at Simplot. I launched the Innate potatoes, and that's still going pretty well. And then I left, and when CRISPR technology came around, I thought that would be a really interesting time to explore it in a startup in this space. And so I co-founded Pairwise, one of the leading CRISPR companies.
Well, let's talk about Innate potatoes. You said it's going very well. What was the motivation, and how did this ideation came along? And I just want to also comment later about the entrepreneurial mindset that you alluded to, and the importance of failure. We'll discuss that later, but very curious about the Innate potato.
Yeah, so it was and this is one thing I always admired about the Simplot family. They've stayed very close to their roots. And that's both a commitment to the communities where they are, but also a commitment to improving potatoes. Their family's been in that business over 100 years. And And I think that Monsanto had gotten in early, like in the late '90s, and then gotten out. And it was a challenge. Like, how are you going to bring some of these new genetic technologies? And so one of the things we worked on was, well, maybe the frozen space is not the French fry space is not the place to go first, even though that's the company's core business. Why don't we look at the fresh market, the table market, demonstrate that there's some advantages there, demonstrate they'll grow, demonstrate the consumers will buy it, and then it can be adopted over time. And so anyway, the Innate strategy and those that really started as a fresh potato strategy that's now migrated into a number of different endeavors there. And from what I understand, it's going well.
For the benefit of everyone, what is that innate trait? I mean, what does it do?
Yeah, they had a couple early, but the first generation was non-browning and low acrylamide. Yeah. And then the second generation, they had late blight resistance and actually the ability to store potatoes longer. Well, that's cool. And then they've since had more innovations coming. So, but that non-browning trait. So potatoes are a crop where you generally harvest them once a year and then you store them for the rest of the season. And I don't know, every other year, every third year, you get significant bruise damage in storage, especially the later you go. And so having a lot less bruise damage is a sustainability advantage. And in those years when they have those bruise issues, it can be an advantage.
That's pretty cool, actually. That reduces food wastage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in our department, we really focus on three terms: sustainability, wellness, and food security. And I think one of the ways to achieve all these is to make sure we don't waste food as well. So that's pretty cool. So, of course, then your journey went to establishing the Pairwise company. And how did that come to be? What was the journey to get to that?
Yeah, it's a little convoluted. I kind of wanted to start a company by the time I was 40. I'd been in Silicon Valley. I'd been kind of early, and so I'd looked at a couple of different things, and there was a group of folks as CRISPR technology got invented and started to get invested in for ag, looking to get an ag startup, and so there was a number of us that came together. It was the three professors at Harvard and MIT, Keith Young and David Liu and Feng Zhang, and then Monsanto/Bayer was one of the early investors. And I think one of the things that I was interested in doing is that sometimes with these new technologies, especially something controversial like genetics, it's important to have it be perceived as a social good. Yeah. And I think you're seeing that with ChatGPT, right? If it had come out as military hardware right away, how would we all feel about it? We're plenty scared as it is, but coming out as a way to help you do homework or write your resume, seems reasonable. So so how do you position something like as powerful as genetics as a social good? And I wanted to work on, and I had young kids at the time, and it was a struggle to get them to eat enough fruits and vegetables. And it's variability, it's quality, it's what can go in the lunch every day. And so one of my ideas was, people love cherries. If we could just make them available year round, we'd eat 5 times as much of them, just like blueberries. And then, one of my colleagues at the time said, well, if you really want to help consumers, let's get rid of those darn pits. And so that ended up being one of these founding ideas, and something that, Pairwise is still working, and I'm proud of the work they're doing. I think it'll come to the market. It's certainly a long-term commitment, but positioning as a social good, I think is really important. And that's maybe ties back to horticulture. Again, thinking about the products, that is something we all relate to. We relate to the flowers and the fruit and the vegetables and the nuts.
Well, so you talked about the pitless cherry piece, and but before that, Pairwise has already brought a product to market.
Yeah.
Could you speak about that?
Yeah. So they, they brought the first one in North America, or Western North America and Europe, was a leafy green. It was mustard greens, which are super healthy. So when we think about healthy grains, I think we're generally aware that iceberg's all water, romaine's a little better, and kale's what you should be eating. Yeah. Well, kale's a brassica. And most brassica greens, and there's hundreds of them, are bitter or pungent. And kale happened to be bred. Some kale varieties are still really pungent. So this was an example where you could eliminate that pungency and bring a variety that had to be cooked now to be eaten fresh. And so we did a test market, went into food service, had pretty good feedback, and then and then it really needs to be more in a breeding effort and lots of new varieties. And so we end up selling it to Bayer, and or licensing to Bayer, and Bayer's taking it forward and now selling that seed. I think it was a good example of, again, positioning as a social good, high nutrient dense greens.
Yeah. When we talk about gene editing and producing a product like that, a lot of people think that, oh, this is just one gene that you shut down, and it was just, one, like a silver bullet kind of concept. Could you elaborate on that, how this tech worked in this particular case and what was involved? Because I think having also our audiences, our people are seeking knowledge, information now. They want to know how things work, and I think it's just good to know what did you have to go through to develop that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna get a little technical here, if that's okay, in the sense that so if you're in a diploid background and it's a single gene mutation, the breeders probably already would have found it, even if it's double recessive, right? It would have been in any of these crops that are have been bred, that you generally would have. Now now breeding is about finding new variation that occurs all the time, but if it was historical, it probably would have been found. And so the mustard greens are tetraploid, and then that bitterness pungency is fairly conserved. So it was actually a 7 gene family, and there were a couple of copies of each. I can't remember if the final number was 17 or 18, but you had to design guide RNAs that would get them all to get rid of the pungency. And there were, what you're doing, you're disrupting a metabolic pathway. And there are a couple of different ways to do it. We had to try a couple of different ways. One of the advantages, though, is that it was something that could be grown fast. It was something that you could really taste the difference. And again, this is like I want to work on drought resistance and some of these other really problems, but it's hard to see and it's hard to relate to. Here, picking a problem that you can relate to was important. But yeah, so it was 17 or 18 genes, a significant number of knockouts.
Well, just for simplifying, so diploid is 2 pairs of chromosomes like we do, and tetraploids would be 4 pairs of chromosomes. Wheat has 6 pairs, strawberry has 8 pairs of chromosomes. So I think the complexity to knock out so many genes or change so many genes, because that's really a Herculean task. So that's really cool that you were able to bring it to the market. And I think it's very timely, because in the controlled environment horticulture space, everybody wants to grow lettuce. But there's disease problems, and I think mustard greens might offer a better solution.
Yeah, I think that's right. That you'll eventually see those probably go indoor and some of the, because that the customer that's willing to pay for that quality is also interested in nutrition. Yeah. I think that's one of the things I found about being in the salad market. One is it's complicated, but two, that there are certainly different customer segments. I mean, I struggle with this with my kids. Like, I have a daughter that only wants to eat Caesar salad, right? And I bring something home with a little bit of kale in it, she's not touching it, and so finding the textures that meet the palates. I mean, it's always more complicated than we want to let on.
You're talking about preferences. Pungency in mustard greens is like a cultural preference some places.
Well, it is in Asia for sure, but they're mostly cooked even there. And it was a southern. I mean, we Pairwise, a North Carolina company. It is in southern cuisine, but it's mostly cooked. Okay. So you can see some of the parent varieties. They might be mixed into a spicy salad mix, but like 1 or 2%. Okay. You can't really. There's no one that really wants a whole mouthful of those or bites of it. So, but I think as a cook, that's honestly where you would borrowing some of the agronomic performance, that those varieties already grew well enough in an agricultural environment to be cooked.
Yeah. We were at CS Food Tech in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I wanted to try some of those. They were amazing. They were delicious. And yeah, I didn't taste any pungency. Of course, I like pungent.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
But I enjoyed them as well, because they provide a different level of texture, and that's a great product to be in the market first. It's healthful, of course. Aligns with our goal of wellness in our department as well.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. I wanted to go back to the entrepreneurial mindset. You interact with a lot of people, students, maybe younger generation folks who are coming up in their, what kind of messaging do you think about? Everybody wants to follow the safe way, and entrepreneurship is not always safe. So this is a little bit of philosophical approach to life. What kind of messaging you would give them? Should they experiment or play it safe, or what What kind of messaging would you like to give them?
Well, I've got a couple of frameworks for how I think about it, which doesn't mean they're right. So just don't take my advice, certainly without plenty of due diligence on your own part. But I think that in an industry that's brand new, it doesn't really matter who has experience and who doesn't, because everyone's figuring out at the same time. And sort of then you're getting to sort of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour. The people that get in early first figure it out, and you can see early success as a young entrepreneur. But it has to be a brand new industry. I think older industries, or where the more mature industries, it really helps to understand what the customer's problem is, or entrepreneurship is really matching supply and demand from an economic perspective. That somebody wants something, but there's not a supply, and you're going to figure out how to create that. In this case, like the cherry example, we believe that consumers really don't want pizza and cherries, and so that's the demand piece. The supply piece is CRISPR is going to go create that after 10 years. So I think that's sort of if I really do think experience helps if it's an established industry. But the problem is, the older you get, the more risk adverse you become, and the more on the financial risk. So, I personally, I'm more motivated by what problem I can solve. Yeah. And so this gets to the different. I have found that, the people that just want to get rich, they're chasing the last year's pattern. It's like picking last year's favorite stock. It never performs the next year. Very rarely. Maybe Nvidia is an exception now, but we'll see what next year's like. So I don't think that just chasing money is necessarily the best recipe. There's just as much success from finding a problem you want to solve and figuring out how to solve it.
Well, I just wanted to plug in for academics then, because our mission, for example, in a land-grant university and College of Ag, Horticultural Sciences, we work with our industry. And we are listening to what their issues are, and all of my colleagues are really addressing some of the other problem, although the reward system is not starting a company, but generating knowledge to help them with their current crops. But also some of us are working on developing new breeds, or now gene editing as well. How, in your mind, you've also interacted a lot with universities while you've been in the entrepreneurial space and the business space. What can we do better to connect the two, or is there a need to connect the two?
Well, I've admired some of the centers. I think Texas A&M is a positive example of this, but there are some that could be better. But let me go where I've admired some of the systems in Europe, and this gets maybe specific being in potatoes. Potatoes is a very important crop in some of these areas. But what I've seen in Europe and some of these institutions is they've really chosen to try to have national centers of excellence, where you're combining like really early research, maybe some breeding, so genetics, and then late stage agricultural, horticultural practices, and they're all in one place, and you've got this environment. And one of the difficulties of the land grant system is you're more focused on a regional problem rather than thinking about the whole nation. So I think that can be a challenge, that like thinking about the big problems. Now the other thing that I admire what they do in Europe, and I'm speaking specifically the Netherlands and UK, I think it's similar in Spain and France, but I'm not as familiar with those, is that they have got a grant system where if the company will put in 10 or 20%, the chances of getting that grant go up 3 or 4x. And so you're really trying to figure out this co-investment model, and it's a strong signal. Now you still have to have scientific rigor, but I think that I have not seen a real good system for that in the U.S. Now, when you go apply for a grant, you want letters from a company that's an important problem, but it's a big difference of, am I willing to put in, on a $2 million grant, am I willing to put in $200,000 over 5 years? So I think we could use some of these mechanisms. Now, I'll give you a plug on Texas A&M. This is a good example of where you've combined the whole system here. It's like Wageningen or James Hutton or John Ennis, that you've got a lot of the pieces here, and I think you are listening to your regional growers. But I think hearing someone complain is different than this is where they're willing to put their money. Yeah. And that's a tool you could probably use to help even get more focused on what the important problems are.
Yeah. Well, given you have so much experience and you've gone through these various stages of life and companies, failures, what So I always have this interaction with students. They're always afraid to fail. So we've created a culture where failure is uh, not an option. And is that fair?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up again because I certainly don't like to fail. Yeah, no one does. I think the other thing is that this idea we're A students, and so we get the pat on the head for getting your A, and but the reality is that the further you get in your career, you realize it's a lot of mistakes with learnings, and then a few things you get right, and so I think establishing that pattern, maybe more behavioral norms, and acceptance. Now that's also maybe why all these internet riches isn't the best example, because these folks made billions in their 20s. That's not the reality for most of us in most of our industries. There are a few that get, either they got lucky or they're incredibly competent, right place, right time. But for most of us in our careers, it really is a process where we learn. And it's true at the organizational level too. So I think it's figuring out how to make that more of a cultural norm with students. But it's challenging environment where we're trying to get A's, because if we get A's, we get to go to the next step, the next step, the next step.
Yeah, so would you say the openness to failure or resilience to failure is kind of part of the entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that failure word is so toxic that you almost can't use it. It's really about learnings or things that didn't go well. And I used to one time I was at a company and we tried to get people to stand up and talk about failures. It was just too culturally hard to use the word. So things that didn't go right. But that is absolutely part of, and in the entrepreneurial journey, there are multiple steps, like getting someone to give you money, the first technical results, the first product launch, the first sale, the first customer, and then eventually, hopefully, profitability. And there's failures literally all the way through that process.
Well, learning from my own examples of being an entrepreneur as well, I've kind of also felt like our students are missing out, because it brings so much excitement when you can really solve a real world problem and you see the product or the results of your research or development that you've done helping somebody. I think that tangible thing is kind of addictive. And you've seen that over and over again in your businesses endeavors. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And this gets maybe where we redefine success as a result, not necessarily a positive or negative result, right? And so that sense of discovery, that sense of trying something new and seeing how it's going. Now, the thing on entrepreneur is you kind of betting it all a little bit all the time, because most companies are not profitable right away, and so there's a little bit more of an edge there. But I think that's right. That part of the thing that I'm trying to do is stay positive. I want to die an optimist. I want to keep staying positive and keep staying optimistic, and that's an important part of the entrepreneurial process too, right? It is not, if you get negative easily, you might as well choose something safe.
Yeah, sometimes entrepreneurs are called irrational optimists.
Yeah, you have to be that a little bit. Now there is some data out there that suggests that pessimists that can get over it are like some of the most successful people, but most of the ones we think about are irrational optimists.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to go back briefly to Simplot, where you did strawberry, another very important horticultural crops. What kind of targets did you change there, or what was the innovation in that space that you brought in?
Yeah, so we're working on potatoes, and we were working on we were doing two things. We were working on soil diseases, and we were working on storage, which has a lot to do with sugars. Yeah. And we started to look the confluence of a couple things. One is, if you looked at the top, of course this is like 12, 15 years ago, if you looked at the top 6 crops in the U.S. by market value, if I recall, all of the potatoes was number 6 or 7. And all of the ones above it were GMO except wheat. So then when Simplot was working on potatoes, and then you look down, like where was the next most value, and strawberries is right behind potatoes on U.S. farm gate value. At least it was when I looked at that data a long time ago. And then what also was interesting was that a lot of the problems were pretty similar. like the soil disease pathogens, the verticillium, some of the fungi. So there's some overlap there. Both those crops are fumigated, and so there was some overlap there. And then the second thing is, one of the struggles I'd always had with strawberries is you get one week they're good, and the next week they're not good, and the week after that, and so they're changing over varieties, but they're also it's pretty inconsistent. So we had some ideas for flavor or shelf life, and so the next thing is you want to work on good germplasm. You don't want to use bad germplasm, and so could we find a partner? And we went down to Watsonville, California, the strawberry capital of the world, and Plant Sciences was a prominent breeder there, and they were willing to partner on this. And I think, Simplot and Plant Sciences have continued to work together, and after 10 years, they've got some products they're launching. And so, anyway, that's how it came about. And it's two family companies that are interested in, and I think they really aligned on how do we have a better product for consumers.
Well, so you become a leader in many senses because of all these experiences and bringing products to market. Federal agencies, you advise them, other bigger companies. Where do you see the field of horticulture, fruits, vegetables, nuts, leafy greens headed next? What are some of the areas of innovation you think that are needed right now?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples, and it doesn't mean I'm right again, so don't take this but my back of the envelope math says that the U.S. buys about $100 billion worth of fruit and vegetables, or just fruit. Sorry, vegetables is another $100 billion, and there's pretty good retail numbers, but there's not good food service numbers, and then you got to go back with imports, because it's not all produced here. There's a fair amount that's imported, as you know. Most of that fruit's picked by hand, and a lot of the times it's 40 to 50% of the cost of the crop. So if you take this back of the envelope math and you say, well, you've got $100 billion of value, and we're spending 40 to 50 billion to pick it. So machine harvesting and with the issues with labor, I see machine harvesting as a big opportunity. Now it's going to be the combination of both genetics and robotics and horticultural practices. So it'll take a while, but I think that's where it has to go. So that's one. I think we've seen a lot of investment in indoor, and what the investors were doing was pattern matching the success in tomatoes with other things, and it just didn't happen. And so, but I think it's probably going to take another generation, but it will. I think we're going to see more crops, things like strawberries, other things grown indoors for the consistency and closer to market. So it got overhyped early, but I think just like the internet, that's going to hang around and going to really matter.
Well, with controlled environment, I think the expense on lighting the systems is the biggest challenge in itself, and genetics, right?
Well, yeah, the capital for vertical, the capital to invest in those systems is pretty darn expensive. But if you were just going to use more traditional greenhouses or controlled environment, then you get to the power but remember, you still got to add all that labor for picking. At least when leafy greens can be harvest automated, but some of these others. So I think it's a multifactorial problem. But where the controlled environment is on some of these fruits or some of these, where they can offer a unique product or a better tasting product, I think the market eventually is going to be there.
Well, I think there have been some misses in that. We had an apple harvester company that did go down under, it didn't make it, and but I'm sure this is just a cycle, an innovation cycle will get to a point, and controlled environment horticulture is becoming bigger and bigger, of course. So being the quintessential innovator you are, what's next for you?
I don't know. I've tried to find a couple of problems I'm interested in solving. It could be that starting a company is the right thing. It could also be, I don't think that there's enough business information around the technology, and I'd like to figure out. I appreciate you guys inviting me, and it's a chance to present some ideas. So somehow getting some more information out would be an interesting way to do it. But I've never been someone that likes to sit down and write. I kind of like to get out and do things. So anyway, I'm still figuring out what problem to focus on next, to be honest. So one of the areas I've been interested in for a while is the pollution issues with fertilizer. If you own a factory, you have to be really watch your wastewater, really, but agriculture kind of gets a free pass. And sometimes we treat fertilizer like insurance. It's so cheap. And long term, that's not going to be where we are. And so we need more solutions there. Now, whether they can be cost effective and something a grower can use, I don't know. But that's a problem I've been thinking about.
So Haven, I mean, you've done a lot of things, and what really drives Haven? I mean, yes, you've done innovations and everything, but what is your basic motivation that drives you?
Well, it's actually changed over each decade. When I think about my 20s, 30s, and 40s, and my 50s are still a little ways off, but they're coming around pretty quick. I really liked when I was younger the idea of disruption, like turning an industry on its head. And I wasn't afraid to do it, and I didn't think about the consequences so much. I've really been interested in the social good. But as I age a little bit, I think about the problems my kids are going to have to deal with, right? And I want to have grandkids, and so how do we get ahead and solve some of these social problems that matter? And that gets to maybe pollution, but also gets to this machine harvest issue, right? If we could start out harvesting, we could have much better tasting produce, because we're, from a genetics perspective, we're sorting at shippability almost above everything else, above flavor, above some of these other things. So I think there's some opportunities there, but it is moving, moving maybe less self-centered and emotional rewards, and more about what's going to matter for the next generation.
No, thank you. You've made so many contributions, and thank you for being here today. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I'm sure, and I know that the students really appreciate that, and they would love to learn more from you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Horticultural Innovators. Subscribe if you want to learn more and spread the good word. Thanks, and Gegam.